Hey guys! So for my second video lecture, I told you I was going to answer some of your questions from last week, and thank you for all of those of you who turned them in. They were really, really good questions. So today I'm going to spend some time talking about what you read last week, and then we'll be talking about what you're going to be reading this upcoming week. And we're going to be focusing on a lot of the things that I was planning on talking about already with what we're going to talk about with what you already have read and then what you will be reading. Some of these questions I'll be answering deals directly with those. So I hope these video lectures are helpful for you guys. Please let me know if they are or if they're not. And if you want any additional help, please let me know via email. Would be great. So first, this past week, you guys read this really interesting conversation between Porphyry and Raskolnikov. This is kind of the chapter I really want to focus in on, because we have really the heart of why Raskolnikov did what he did. So Razumikin and Raskolnikov go to Porphyry's house. Kind of the goal for Raskolnikov is to find out how much Porphyry knows. So Porphyry is the lead investigator on the murder case. And Raskolnikov he tells Razumikin, hey, can you come with me because I had some pledges that I left with the old woman that I want back because they're really important. But really, we know that his goal is to figure out what does Porphyry know and should he be worried, essentially. And Porphyry he's such an interesting character because it really does seem like he knows, because he has very, very pointed questions. So when he's talking about Raskolnikov's article, right? And that's what we're going to kind of focus in on today. He's talking about Raskolnikov's theory that men are divided into two categories. There are ordinary men, and their job in life is to just reproduce and be conscientious citizens and to keep the human race going, essentially. And then the extraordinary men, the other group, are men who are able to have some new idea, who are going to lead people into a greater understanding of humanity, who are going to do great things for the good of all people. And Raskolnikov's theory is that if you are an extraordinary man and you are going to do great things for the good of all people, you are allowed to go against certain barriers or take down certain obstacles, is what he says, or overstep certain moral boundaries. And in this case, what the example he gives is if Newton had to, he gives several examples, like Julius Caesar and Napoleon are two that he brings up a lot. If those people had to kill people or sidestep certain moral obstacles to come up with their new idea or to succeed in their endeavors, Raskolnikov believes that they would be morally able to do that. And not even morally able to, but he even says have a certain obligation to do that, to kill people, get them out of the way so that their endeavors could succeed. And so this goes to the heart of what Raskolnikov did, right? We know now that Raskolnikov is trying to see whether or not he is an extraordinary man. And that's really why he killed the old woman, so he can discover this, right? And so in my copy, again, this is the Barnes & Noble version, on page 252, he talks about the punishment, and I want you guys to kind of focus in on this. On the top of page 252, what then? Raskolnikov smiled in reply. That's not my fault. So it is, and so it always will be. He said just now, he nodded at Razumikin, that I permit bloodshed. Society is too well protected by prisons, banishment, criminal investigators, penal servitude. There's no need to be uneasy. You have but to catch the thief. And what if we do catch him? Then he gets what he deserves. You are certainly logical, but what of his conscience? Why do you care about that? Simply from humanity. If he has a conscience, he will suffer for his mistake. That will be his punishment, as well as prison. But the real geniuses, asked Razumikin, frowning, those who have the right to murder, oughtn't they to suffer at all, even for the blood they've shed? Why the word ought? It's not a matter of permission or prohibition. He will suffer if he is sorry for his victim. Pain and suffering are always inevitable for a large intelligence and a deep heart. The really great men must, I think, have great sadness on earth. He added dreamily, not in the tone of the conversation. So this section comes when Raskolnikov is talking about his theory, and then Porfiry puts to him, well, what if an ordinary man thinks that he's extraordinary, and then, as in Raskolnikov, and then goes and murders someone thinking that they have a moral obligation or a moral duty to do that. And then Raskolnikov replies that if he has a conscience, he will suffer for his mistake, if he's actually sorry for it. But he says you don't really have to worry about it because the police will catch him anyway, so it doesn't really matter. And then he talks about how in the future, people, if it really is a great man, people in the future will regard them as heroes, just like Napoleon, just like Julius Caesar, people who killed a lot of people and did great things, as Raskolnikov thinks. So I want you to think about what that punishment is. Specifically looking at Raskolnikov pre-murder and post-murder, right? He's been losing his mind, essentially. He's been in delirium. He's been in and out. I'm sure you guys are enjoying how much he is going crazy, essentially. And I want you to be thinking about, do you think his conscience bothers him at this point? Or do you think he's just unhinged from poverty, from lack of anything to do, from hunger, sickness, things like that? So this week, you guys are going to be reading part 4, chapter 4. Part 4, chapters 4 and 5. And in this part, I really, really want you to focus on the characters of Raskolnikov and Sonia. Chapter 4 is actually my favorite chapter in Crime and Punishment. And it's a really, really beautiful scene as Raskolnikov and Sonia are sitting there reading the gospel. And they're reading specifically the story of the raising of Lazarus. And I'm going to get into this a little bit more as I answer some of your questions, because one of the questions goes right to this. So this week, you guys are going to be doing a character study, which is posted on Plus Portals under class files. It's also in the assignments tab. And I want you to be thinking as you read, how are Raskolnikov and Sonia similar and how are they different? Raskolnikov in chapter 4 thinks that they are very similar and that they have, that they're actually necessary for each other, and that they're going in the same direction. And so I want you guys to be thinking about that. Also this week, today, the hero anti-hero worksheet was due, and that was really to focus in on just Raskolnikov. Do you think that he's a sympathetic character, a person we should admire, a person we should despise? And I just kind of want you to be thinking about, like, what do you make of Raskolnikov? I think he is such an interesting character. Because there are, like, right, he's an axe murderer. However, he's extraordinarily generous and he loves his family and he helps out the Marmeladovs and he's really attuned to their suffering. And so it's hard to dismiss him right away as just a murderer. All right, so the last thing I'm just going to say before I go into answering your questions, I want you to be thinking about why Dostoevsky would use the story of the raising of Lazarus for this chapter. He could have used so many stories from the gospel, but he chooses the raising of Lazarus, and I want you to think about why that is. And I think it goes right to the heart of what this whole book is about. All right, so first question. I picked out 8 of them. I just couldn't do them all. But if you have specific questions that you want to send to me via email, I'm happy to answer those as well. So number 1, why does Raskolnikov keep changing why he said he did it? if one were to do something that serious, I feel like you should know why. That's a fair question. I think at the end of the day, Raskolnikov wanted to see if he was an extraordinary man, and that's why he did it ultimately. And in theory, the robbery was supposed to get him on his way. He was supposed to take that money and make a new life for himself, be able to put that money towards finishing school. And he says that later on, that he only wanted to take as much as he needed to keep going in his studies. But I think at the very heart of it, obviously from what he ended up actually doing with the money, it's just to see if he is truly extraordinary. Number 2. Why doesn't Raskolnikov feel more guilt for killing the sister Lizaveta? She did him no wrong, and the pawnbroker, who he feels guilt about killing, but he felt that she had deserved it. Okay. So that is actually a really, really good question, right? Lizaveta was never meant to be killed. It was just supposed to be the pawnbroker. But then she came in, and he had to do it because she would have given him away. As you read chapter 4, I want you to focus in on actually the character of Lizaveta, because she comes up a lot. I don't know if he is feeling guilty yet about killing either of them. I think that he is definitely losing his mind. He's definitely struggling with what he did and kind of the reality of what he did. But I don't know if it's guilt. And maybe you can make an argument that it is. But I want you guys to be thinking about that as we keep reading. Number 3. What makes the main character, Raskolnikov, not want to spend the money that he stole from the old lady? So one of the ways to study this, and what a lot of people do study it as, is just a psychological study of man, and the psychological impacts of crime, which is this is a great book for that. Honestly, for that, I think he didn't steal the money, right? He was kind of trying to do this like perfect crime almost. And he wanted to steal the money to get him on his way so that he could finish his studies in the university. I think that he didn't realize how horrible it would be to actually murder a person. And he was so struck by the act of what he did. He was so confused, so delirious, that he felt like he couldn't actually use the money. The money after the murder doesn't actually even matter to him, right? He buries it under a rock. And he's thinking about throwing it into the river, right? So I think that honestly, it was just the shock of what he did that the money no longer mattered to him. Number 4, this one's an easy one. What time period, year did Crime and Punishment take place? The Crime and Punishment was published in 1866, and it takes place in the summertime, St. Petersburg, Russia. It was published in 1866. It takes place around the same time. I'm going to pause the video here, and then I'll upload a part 2